Hey, what's up?
Hello.
Man, it is good to be here again. Always awesome
Yes.
to be on the show, just being able to talk, match it up, talk to people who are just awesome doing what they're doing. And tonight we're going to have a cool conversation, actually. And I think it's an important conversation that we have, because I really believe that there's a battle being waged against people's identities, their families, and honestly creation when we talk about what we're going to talk about tonight. And I really believe that with sexual immorality leading this wedge in an attack against love, and that of course would be God. When I was thinking about this for the show notes, for just an opening, it takes me to the Thessalonica church. You know, 1 Thessalonians, where Paul is speaking to the church at Thessalonica. He's telling them to live in a way that pleases God, telling them to live in a way that's encouraging and encouraging them to do so even more, right? He's also telling them to, that they need to heed to Jesus' teachings.
Right.
And I think that that's important, especially in the season of obey. We're in the season of obey. And so it's like we need to listen to what Jesus is saying. And God wants his children to be holy. Right. I mean, that's the goal, right? Stay away from sexual sin. It said it's how a person has control of their body, living in holiness and honor. But watch this, lustful passion like the pagans. Stay away from it. Stay away from it, because I think what it does is it starts to infiltrate our minds, and it takes us away from where we need to be. And really what that leads to is the relationship. Yeah.
And I think in this situation, we're going to be talking about sexual struggles with an emphasis on pornography, but that comes in so many forms. It impacts us in so many ways. And one of the biggest frustrations with any addiction is it's like, okay, even if you want to stay away, even if you want to heed God's word, it's one of those things where it's not as simple as throwing something out. It's not as simple as just, I'm going to stop saying that. It's not as, it's actually on par with things like do not be angry unrighteously. It's like, okay, well, that's going to be a big challenge, except this one gets demonized a lot more than anger. And so it gets, put under and all of these things. So we brought somebody on to help us with this topic, someone that has done a lot of work in this field and who knows what it's like himself. So Carl Thomas knows what it's like to feel trapped by pornography, unwanted sexual behavior, and crushing shame. He's a former porn addict who's been helping others find freedom for over 10 years. And in 2019, he launched Live Free Ministries and created the Live Free Community app to provide a safe and supportive community for men who hunger for real freedom. He also launched Live Free Wives, a free support community for spouses. Carl is an ordained pastor, published author, certified neuro health coach, and the CEO of XXXChurch. He's also written a book that he's going to be telling us about. And his passion for helping individuals find freedom, peace, and purpose is only matched by his New Jersey directness, his love for family, devotion to Philly sports teams, and infatuation with his white Jeep Wrangler. So welcome to the show, Carl.
Yeah, welcome to the show, Carl.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I think we just jump in this.
Let's
tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, we've got where you're at now, but sometimes it's good to see where you were.
Right.
And what pulled you out of that? What brought you away from the pornography? What brought you away from that sexual addiction? Yeah, it's a tough one, but man, I think this is where people really have that struggle. I think in those initial steps of, the light bulb going on and saying, wait. There's a change that needs to happen. Man, tell us more about that.
Well, that's not a short story, so I'll try to keep it tight. But yeah, I mean, I dealt with porn and masturbation, all that good stuff for most of my adult life. Like a lot of guys, started off as a teen. Now, I'm 50. I know it's hard to believe, but
we got two of y'all.
when I first got hooked on porn, the internet wasn't as well. Gosh, when I first got hooked, the internet wasn't even a thing. Right. But then, early days and then broadband. So thank God I avoided some of that, because if I had access to the stuff that the kids have access to now, who knows how bad it would have got. But I dealt with it most of my life. To be honest, until I met my wife, I really didn't care. I mean, I was also sleeping around and things like that. Then I met my wife. I was a Christian. She didn't know I had a bit of a sexual past. She had no idea about the porn. Got married, didn't get any better. Big shocker there. Although a lot of people think once you get married, it goes away. Nope, newsflash.
Right.
Oftentimes it just gets worse. And then I finally told her about it after we had our first child. That's a horrific story. I'll share that for another day, but just horrific because of my timing. My timing was about as awful as you could ask for. And she and I still kind of laugh about it, but I feel like, when we laugh about it, it's like, can you believe you were that big an idiot? Yeah, I can't believe I was that big an idiot. But anyway, got connected with XXXChurch simply because I was really kind of taken with their approach to things. They were very out there, very, kind of challenging, shocking in some regards. I've always been the kid that I don't like to follow the rules, and I always want to be the odd man out when it comes to things, especially in the church world.
Right.
Not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying that's always been me. So I really liked their approach. It was so unorthodox, so out of the box, specifically with their approach to evangelism, going to porn shows, handing out Bibles, just crazy stuff that the average Christian back then especially couldn't get their head wrapped around. It. A mission trip to a porn show, what's that look like? Well, a lot of dildos, so it was pretty crazy, so I followed him, but I was also still looking at porn at the same time. And through it, I would call it a divine series of comedic errors. It was definitely not strategic on my part. I didn't lie to get my way on the team. It was literally just a bunch of oversights that I think were God ordained. But I ended up on a missions team to go to the New Jersey porn show about 10 years ago. Mind you, still looking at porn.
Right. No
business being there. For years, I actually ran the missions trips when I worked for XXXChurch, and that would be a no-go. If a guy said, "Oh, I look at porn," or even, "Hey, I just got free of it a year ago," I tell them, "Wait another year." Right. You don't want to go into that atmosphere. It's pretty intense. But here I was going, and I had just gotten into seminary. Was pursuing a degree there. I was in the insurance business, but I just had this feeling that I was supposed to do something in the ministry world. Back then, silly me, I thought that meant maybe being a pastor at a church. Now I know 10 years later, that would never happen. I'd get fired the first day. So, for real. So at a training talk, the night before the show, and I'm talking to this guy who doesn't work with the ministry anymore, but worked back then, asking him what he does. And he said that he worked with pastors. And I said, "How's that?" And he said, "It's awful." It's like, "What do you mean?" And he told me, he said, "Hey, I work with a lot of pastors who are coming to us because they're struggling. And when I tell them that one of my recommendations is they either step down or step back for a season, depending on how severe the situation is, or maybe just take a sabbatical, usually the answer is no way." Right. And then there's conflict. He said, "It's just never good." And I'm sitting there blown away. What do you mean? You tell him, like, what are you talking about? Right. And then he starts bringing out Thessalonians and Titus and all the things about the elders. And these are all passages I had read, but they just completely flew over my head. And I just realized in that moment that here I was, I just dropped, well, I didn't drop a ton of cash. I signed my life away, right, for a master's degree. So I just put down all this money in the future, right, to pay off a degree, to go pursue a quote unquote calling. And this young buck is telling me that basically, "Hey man, you should probably get your crap together before you start doing that." Right. So that was a major wake up moment. And I've talked about this before, but for me, and I think this is a big factor for a lot of, for most men when they get there, I like the word you used where you said perspective, I think, or what did you say? Light bulb. Yeah, you said light bulb goes off. For me, it was a light bulb moment because I connected the struggle and what I was dealing with my eventual destination, my purpose. And I realized that this thing was holding me back. And see, when you're in that porn struggle and you're whether it's porn, masturbation, whatever, usually most guys most guys and women are guilty of what I would call short-term thinking. So it's, "Hey, do I look at porn and masturbate and have an orgasm and feel good right now? But then if I do, I'm going to feel a whole lot of shame and feel like a complete piece of crap." So which is it? Do I want to feel good but feel bad emotionally, feel good emotionally, or feel bad physically? And let's be real, most of the time orgasm wins, because it's pretty powerful, right? But for me, that shift in thinking was, okay, now the next time an opportunity presented itself, it was, hey, it's not even about the momentary shame or guilt or any of that. It's, do I feel good now, or do I put off what I want to do, right, which is going to impact my entire life? And when I started thinking like going at this thing with like a long-term perspective, the value proposition radically shifted. So now it was an orgasm versus the rest of my life. No brainer. I'll go with the rest of my life, right? And so it was, one day turned into 1 week, turned into a month, turned into a year, blah, 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 blah. And I'll say in the early years, I wouldn't say I was quote unquote free. I would say I was probably more sober than free, even though I was thinking and I had much more awareness about my situation. But over time, the healing started coming in terms of emotions and understanding why I was going to that stuff in the first place. And so now it wasn't just having the mental awareness in the moment to say no. It started becoming more about, hey, this just isn't really that much of a struggle anymore, because I'm not being triggered by all these things that were eating at me and eating at my soul, in my for most of my life. So it was a shift. But I do want to say this, because sometimes people hear that and they think, oh, like, it was just instant. No, like, I have been down this road for 20 plus years. I had been trying to quit for 5 or 6 plus years. I had just recently got an accountability partner. There was definitely a ton of ups and downs. It wasn't one of those, hey, dear Jesus, please take this away, and then God comes down and hits me on the head with his like magic fairy dust and I'm cured. It wasn't like that. And I've heard stories like that where, oh, I just asked God to deliver me from porn and he did. Dude, it might happen. I'm not saying it can't happen, but I would tell you 99% of the time, it doesn't happen like that. That's just not how God works. Man, it's not, hey, I'm your... It just doesn't work like that.
I'm in a cool statistic because I got the fairy dust.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know what it was. Okay, so PTSD and pornography were just gone. Like delusions, nightmares, flashbacks, and pornography just, I don't know, fell off the planet in my world. It was amazing. But I understand this struggle because I do deal with men. But what I'm hearing in this is I'm hearing a lot of this struggling but not feeling alone. Mm-hmm. And like what you're speaking to right now, and I think Michelle can add to that or add to something here.
Well, I know that you have a big part of your ministry is the community aspect. Yeah. And in Ephesians 5, it talks about the power that light has over the darkness, and that shining light. It's not just, a lot of people, they want to say, like expose it, and they want to like point out and expose other people's sins. But what people don't always realize is that when you start talking about it outright in a safe community setting, you're shining light on your own things with the power of God, so that you can start bringing it into the light, dragging this thing you no longer want into the light, where you can actually look at it and actually get real about it. Not feel alone, not feel that shame, but actually start working in it. And so I want you to kind of just let people know a little bit more about how community is kind of integral to what you guys are doing at XXX Church and at Live Free Ministries.
Yeah, I mean, not all, but most of our resources are all community focused. We do have one video workshop. We used to be associated with X3 Watch, which is accountability software. That's not ours anymore. We do recommend it, but that's actually a whole different company. Right. But Live Free Community app, Live Free Wives, small groups online, all these things. Yeah, they're all sources of community. Right. And that came, like, the focus there was just from my years, honestly, with XXX Church, being behind so many different resources and so many different launches and trying so many different things, like software, workshops, this, that, the other thing. But small groups online, which back then was called X3 Groups, that was a brand new idea. I was like, hey, support groups online, could that work? And that was my first job, honestly, with them. I was a part-time job trying to launch this ministry. And they said, hey, we have this thing we want to try, and we got some groups. Would you like to run with it? I said, sure. They didn't tell me the whole story. Some groups actually meant one group with 8 dudes and 1 leader. So it was like, to say it was humble beginnings is on a Tumblr website. It was awful. And I just ran with it, and we started recruiting leaders, and it just grew pretty rapidly. Today we have 60 plus leaders, and we're close to 500 members. But over the years of working on that end of things, plus doing all the other stuff with XXX Church, I would just say that for me, hands down, the most impactful side of the ministry that I thought was the groups. Now, sure, I was involved in it, but I was just seeing life change constantly happening. We started off with 15 to 20 leaders that I handpicked, all guys who had already been through this and conquered it and whatever. Now today, I'd say 90 to 95% of our leaders are all former members. Right. They're all guys that came through this. So just seeing tangible life change is so impactful. You put out a workshop. Workshops are great. We used to see the statistics all the time with the workshops. The majority of the time, they never get finished. I'm not saying the stuff in them isn't good. I'm not saying it can't change someone's perspective radically, and it's not an important part of recovery. Like, you definitely need the information to understand the nature of what you're dealing with. But it just doesn't have it doesn't have, in my opinion, the same impact that being in a supportive community does. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's not just, hey, I just need someone to pat me on the back. It's, yes, there's a theological aspect to it, of course. We know we were born to we were created to be in community. That's from the early pages of the Bible, the first few pages of the Bible. It's pretty clear. There's many passages, in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes talking about the value of having people with you in life and why you need them. I think one of my favorite ones, and I'm not Mr. Scripture reference guy, but
don't worry about it.
One of my favorite verses that I don't know the reference for is, I believe, in Ecclesiastes, but the rough Jersey paraphrase is, hey, blessed is the guy who has somebody with him when he gets into a problem.
Right.
But man, the guy who's got nobody, he's in real trouble. And I think the Bible actually uses the word real trouble, which to me is perfect. Like, how you can't say it any clearer, real trouble. So, theologically, it's without a doubt obvious that we need community, but biologically, scientifically speaking, there's just a ton of data out there, studies and all sorts of research out there that shows the impact that being in a support group has in terms of like your mental health, your emotional health. When you're in a group situation, it releases oxytocin, which is a bonding thing. And people with low oxytocin levels struggle with often depression, impulse control, anger, like all the things you see people struggling with usually when they're dealing with porn, right? Those are usually common things. Very angry people, poor impulse control, they struggle sexually. All that stuff is related to low levels of oxytocin. And oxytocin is one of those things that gets released, yes, in an orgasm, yes, when breastfeeding, but also when you're in a collective group.
Right.
So there's just a ton of stuff out there. And I would go so far to say that if you're doing everything, trying to get free of the stuff, but the one thing you're not willing to do is talk to other people, you're probably going to be spinning your wheels for the rest of your life. Right. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, okay. So back to the fairy dust, because he said a lot there, and I just want people to know, because he said anger at the end, and all of these subcategories to addiction. I call them fixes. I was a fix guy. If it wasn't drugs, it was a woman. If it wasn't a woman, it was pornography. Whatever was in my way that could help me at that moment to get over whatever problem I was suffering through. But the anger and stuff like that, that was something like, we were talking about the fairy dust. It's like, but anger is something that I had to really work through, and like being able to control other emotions was something that I had to work through. And that was, of course, through Christ. But as I'm sitting here listening to this community thing and online community, and I mean, I'll bet you at the beginning of COVID, people probably were like, does online community really work? And then now by the end of COVID, I think a lot of pastors and people in the church are like, yeah, it kind of does. We had a room for this. But I'm also going to go back to this, because you're talking about the churches. You're talking about, I'm not that church guy. But I think that we need people like you. I'm one of those that sits in a church that probably most people wouldn't understand my story. like they wouldn't grasp all the addictions and all that stuff that I went through and came out of. But God has me in there for a reason. And probably I should have been fired the first day I came in the church, but I am that thorn, the one that's always like, what pastor, huh? And questioning, like I do all that stuff. But they love me for it. Over time they learn. But how does that work in online groups? I mean, like, let's say somebody gets into this, you know, like, you know, they want to live free, right? They're ready to get rid of this. Middle of the night, I know somebody, it's like the middle of the night, it's like everyone's asleep in the house, and, you know, they get up, and then next thing you know, they're on their phone, and next thing you know, they're in the middle of it. Is there resources available all the time for people that, because I mean, at nighttime, it's like when it strikes, it's amazing how darkness brings in darkness.
Right.
How does that work?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, some of that is on the user or on the person, right? Like if you have, I mean, I'm never going to say that group accountability surpasses or replaces individual accountability, but I would also say I have had people quit groups or quit Live Free Community and say, I have an accountability partner now, I don't need you. And I'm like, no, one doesn't remove the need for the other. They're both a source of accountability, but from my perspective, they offer a bit of a different benefit, right? So having that individual accountability partner that you can reach out to is great. But hey, listen, Brian might be asleep at 2:00 in the morning. He doesn't want to get your phone call. Our small groups meet weekly, but anybody who's in at least the men and the spouses, they're part of, they get free access to our other online communities. But that's one of the reasons why we did the Live Free app, because there's like over 1,000 men in there, and there's guys on it all hours of the night and day. Now, granted, if you're in the US, most of our users are in the US, even though we have plenty of international users, you hop on 2:00 in the morning, you're probably not going to see the activity you'll see 5:00 in the afternoon. But it's always there. It's always present. Even if you can't interact with somebody necessarily, you're like in that moment, you can at least post something. You can kind of get it out there, expose it, interrupt the thought. And then there's obviously content and different things like that you can dig into to hopefully get your mind off of it. So it's available 24 hours a day. And that was one of the main reasons we wanted to do something like that, because we know this is not a 9 to 5 issue. It's an around the clock issue.
Yeah. And I love that
I just wanted to say something real quick about the fairy dust comment, because I just want you to understand something. Sometimes people think that it's a fairy dust thing, and it's not. What I'm talking about is a very specific situation. I actually, we interview experts on our app all the time, and I've had Doug Weiss on a couple times, right? And I asked Doug that. I said, hey, have you ever met somebody who magically is cured? And Doug said 99% of the time, no. He says he has met a few people, but and I thought the way he expressed it was pretty genius, actually. He says it really depends on why you're dealing with it. So he said in his case, for instance, I can't remember what the other thing was, but I think he had drugs and alcohol and porn. He said, I found Jesus and the drugs and alcohol went away right away, which is kind of crazy, actually, when you think about it, because of the the chemical aspects of it.
Imbalances.
He said, but the porn didn't. The porn stayed. And he said, that's because the reason I was turning to alcohol and drugs was to fill a very certain, like a deep hole in my life that Jesus filled, and I didn't need it anymore. That's it. But the reason I was going to porn was a different reason.
Right.
And so just because I met Jesus didn't change the reason I was going to porn. So in your situation, same sort of thing, right? It might be, it's not, oh, hey, I'm just magically cured. It's something happened, something shifted that removed that need to go there. When I talk about fairy dust, I mean the guys that say, hey, I'm at my wit's end, usually Christians, right? I'm at my wit's end. I've been dealing with this. I'm tired of dealing with it. I just prayed to Jesus one night and he cured me. And it's like, well, again, maybe, but usually there needs to be something there, because you're going to the porn for a reason. If you haven't resolved that reason, you're going to end up going to porn again 99% of the time at some point in the future.
Absolutely.
So
no, that's good clarification. I just talk. I'm like, ooh, fairy dust. That's
He's
cool.
like, yeah, I'm the 1% in something.
No, because I mean, like you said, that void wasn't filled by something I'm doing. It was filled by Christ. And so it was like, because I had an identity crisis, and I think that's a lot of things, pornography and addictions. I'm using this right now because sexual immoralities and all these things usually end up in an identity somewhere, like I'm needing something more. I'm desiring something more. And yeah, dude, it is a struggle because like I said earlier, I have men in that I know that it's not happening overnight, and it's crushing them, and it's like, well, let's work together. Let's figure something out. And I think that's one of the reasons that I found XXX Church before it even popped into my thing, because I'm out here looking for these guys.
Right.
Where can these guys go? Where can the women go, or whoever go, where they can get help? So like Rosie, is another person that we talk to a lot, who handles, the pornography to help women who have husbands. And then she also has resources for women. But it's like, it's just it seems like so many people are struggling with this in today's age. I'm like you. I don't even know where I would have been if I had this in my hand all the time. I remember when like Playboy, and it's like, oh, I upgraded to Hustler. There was still progression. There was still this progression. Yeah. And dude, today it's like, I don't even know. I mean, I experienced a lot of it because, I mean, come on, I didn't come back to like 2014. Hello. So, there was still the internet then, and it was readily available, and it's free. And it's just like one of those things that just is amazing beast that just attacks people.
Yeah, I appreciate that you were using the word sober.
Yeah.
And you made a distinction between actual deliverance and sobriety. And I think that that's an important thing to make as well when we talk about when God does snatch us out of things versus like, why, God, are you not taking this away and and I think you brought it up beautifully about God is in the business of healing our roots. He will rip things out of the ground. But if it's something that cannot be ripped out of the ground, like relationship, because relationship in itself is godly, but the roots are tainted, then he wants to fix the disease that's affecting the roots. And so until that happens, the leaves aren't going to look pretty. The plant's going to look weak. And so rather than asking for God to take the symptoms, because I mean, even back in the day, there were people following him because their symptoms were taking away. But the people that were really about it were the ones who were like there for more than just the visible healing. And they sustain, and I think that that's important. And that brings me to the question of the local church body, because I think that there are a lot of ways that I'm only speaking to, like, quote unquote, the Western church. I'll even say the American church when I say this, because I can relate to that. But in the church, there's a lot of things where I think one of the things I've seen associated with like one of your interviews was don't ask, don't tell, right? And I'm interested in what your perspective and opinion is on this, given all the context, because when it comes to sexual sin and struggles, it's such a carnal thing. So is money and things like that. But for some reason, because of all the different layers and cultural, societal, everything, we don't talk about it much. And it can cause people to stumble when you do, right? Like a woman shouldn't stand up in the midst of tons of men and be like, I struggle with pornography too. That's not the best place. But what advice do you have for the local church for when is it best? Because some people they need those social cues, like they need help with that. When is it best to kind of still maintain the don't ask, don't tell in a church environment? And when is it like, no, this should be a safe place within the local church where we should prepare ourselves to be that, yes, you can tell, and sometimes we can ask, and we want to normalize that.
Yeah. So honestly, I would say outside of the one situation, like you said, so yeah, if you're in a recovery group with a bunch of guys who struggle with porn, you probably shouldn't have a woman, you shouldn't commingle women's and men's recovery groups. It'll just keep triggering each other. Right. That's unfortunate, but it is reality. Outside of that unique situation, my opinion is, I don't think there is a good time for don't ask, don't tell. I mean, that's just my thoughts. In the book, so I wrote a book called When Shame Gets Real, and the subtitle is A New Way to Talk About Sex, Porn, and Masturbation. And the spoiler alert is that it's not a new way. Right? The new way is just talking about it. That's the new way. Like, we don't talk about it, so it is new, but it's really not. It's been around forever. We just don't talk about it the way we need to talk about it. And it sets us up for all sorts of problems. but it really should be something that we can just talk about. I've said this, I was saying this to somebody the other day, and hear me out here, because at first, like, some people hear it and their mind goes, not what I'm saying, but sex, porn, masturbation, escorts, not escorts, but just unwanted sexual behavior, right? Questioning sexual struggles or having issues with sex, all this stuff. It's normal. Okay. Not saying it's healthy, but it's normal, right? It's a normal part of life. Just like being overweight, kind of normal. Living paycheck to paycheck, being tight on your finances. Unfortunately, these days, kind of normal, right? Traffic jams, kind of normal, right? It's just normal.
Right.
And so when you use the word normalize, when we normalize these conversations and these words and these topics, and we talk about them just as a part of life, not saying it's a good part of life, but it's a part of life, we remove a lot of the shame from those situations and from those conversations. And then people are more prone to actually seek help, because now it's not, hey, I'm a weirdo. I'm just one of the many out here that are dealing with this particular part of my life. And just think of it this way. I mean, you could go back 30, 40 years, right? Like alcoholism, drug abuse. Back then, right? Admitting you had a drinking problem or a drug problem, that was very taboo. Today, not that taboo anymore. There's a lot of people that'll just own it, right? Because they realize that alcohol abuse and drug abuse is pretty common, unfortunately. You're seeing that with mental health now. We're like, now people are able to step out and talk about their mental health issues because it's becoming understood that that's just normal. And I got news for you. The sex, porn, and all that stuff, masturbation, the good parts of sex and also the bad parts of sex, it's all normal. It's just normal. And when we can approach it that way, we're going to see a lot more conversations open up. We're going to see a lot more people feeling freer to actually seek help, because it's not that big a deal. But in the church with sex, that's the one area that, even though it's normal, we still like to treat it like it's abnormal. Right. So you'll be in your small group. It's not that odd to have some guy say, yeah, I put on about 50 pounds. I need to go to the gym, not that uncommon, right? Or, hey, can you pray for us? We're a little tight on finances this month, me and my wife. Like, not that big a deal. No one cares. Like, it's, oh yeah, sure, we'll pray. Yeah. What can we do for you? But how many times have you heard a couple say in a small group, hey, listen, me and my wife are kind of struggling sexually right now. Like, we're not connecting and we're having hard times building intimacy, and the romance is just kind of like it's kind of on the fizzle right now. You don't hear that. Right. It's normal. A lot of marriages out there, unfortunately,
and very
in
impactful.
The church, they're not that good, right? Unfortunately, but we don't talk about that because that's not seen as normal. That's seen as, weird, and it's not weird. It's just part of life.
And it does go back, because the Apostle Paul sat there and said it. He's like, look, it's better not to have a wife. He's like, it's better not to have a wife.
It's gonna be
but you know what? The struggle is real. Look, the struggle is real. So you need a wife. And then he even gets even deeper into that conversation, and he's telling them, and you need to be taking care of one another. Now, that's not just like pound it and walk out, you know what I'm saying? It's like, but like, on all those levels, but intimacy is one of those levels. And that's why at the beginning of this, I'm like, this is a battle. This is really a battle that has been waged against, because society these days, man, I don't know how many kids I run into when I'm out talking to people on the street or just hanging out, trying to make connections and stuff. They're like, oh, that's just normal. Like porn, man, it's not doing nothing to me. It's okay. So what would you say to someone like that who's like, nah, man, porn's good, man. It's cool. What does that really do to the relationship or to future relationships?
Yeah, I mean, often when I get involved in conversations about pornography, and even with my own kids, I generally do stay away from a lot of the this is sin and that's bad talk. And I just try to approach it from a health perspective and like what's ideal. So if with my son, I talk about this in the book. I've had a lot of people say that's their favorite part of the book, honestly. But I detail out our whole first conversation about masturbation. And, the way I approach it, I think would make some people's minds probably like, what? You told him what? But I led that conversation with basically, hey, let me tell you about the first time I masturbated.
Right.
And we just broke it down and got into it. But I explained to him, I told him, hey, look, masturbation, orgasms feel pretty darn good, man. I'm not going to lie to you. But then I dumbed it down because he's 13 or 12 at the time. And we were talking about sex and porn much earlier age, but that was the first time we actually got into the nitty gritty about masturbation, which is my bad. Should have done that earlier. But I kind of explained to him the mental health aspects to it and the effects it has on your brain, and how, when you do these things that feel really good, eventually your brain's going to make the connections that, hey, when anything feels bad, this makes me feel good. So I'm going to go to this. And, you're a young kid, you're active. When you have a bad day at school, you go out and you shoot hoops for 2 hours to blow off steam. And you know what? That's really healthy, and it's helping you, and it's a skill set and everything else. I said, you start masturbating, I got news for you. You're going to stop playing basketball. And every time you have a bad day, you're going to go upstairs, lock the door, turn off the lights, and masturbate your mind, blow your mind away, but just masturbate all night. Right. I said, is that healthy? And my son's, no, that doesn't sound very healthy. I'm like, no, it's not. It's extremely unhealthy. Right. So I've had people say to me, what's the big deal about premarital sex? What's the big deal about porn? What's the big deal about all that stuff? And I'm not trying to plug it, but I also talk about that in a book. I have a whole chapter I think it's called Sacred Sexuality. And the whole chapter is basically on this idea of what is sex and what's the purpose of sex. And at the end of the day, I think the reason we have so many questions about sex, the reason we have so many disagreements about sex, the reason sometimes we don't even know how to say what's good or bad. So we have to ask somebody, like I get people emailing us all the time. Hey, if I haven't had sex in 3 months, could I masturbate then, Carl? Like if I give him the okay and the thumbs up,
right?
Right. Yeah, I just put a call to God. He said, yeah, you're good, dude. 3 months and 1 day, you're good. But don't do it before then. And, okay, Carl said, I'm good, so I can masturbate sin-free. It's ridiculous. And I'm not making fun of those people, but that's true. It happens. Right. We want answers because we can't do the thinking for ourselves. And all of it comes back to the fact that from my perspective, we don't really understand sex. We don't understand the purpose of sex. We don't understand the power of sex. We make sex out to be this thing that, you can play with it a little bit, but it might burn you. So like ease off. Like, no, sex is a beautiful thing. God intended us to have sex. That's why he made it so dang awesome. Yes. Right. Like we're supposed to have sex, but we're supposed to have sex for a very specific purpose, which is building intimacy with our spouse because of, again, going back to oxytocin and brain chemicals. Like when you have sex with someone, you bond with that person. There's nothing that's going to bond you physically to a person like sex. Okay. You hold hands, you get a little oxytocin, right? You get that little neurochemical shot. It ain't going to compare to an orgasm. Sorry. Right. And so that's why when we do these other things, it goes so badly, right? It's, well, what's wrong with premarital sex? Well, you know what? Outside of what the Bible says, here's the deal. You're going to be emotionally and chemically bonding with somebody. And then in a month or maybe in a day, if it's a one-night stand, you're going to be done. And that's going to leave emotional trauma, whether you realize it or not. It's going to mess things up. Even if you don't feel bad or you don't feel pain, you're going to have to bring that sexual baggage into your future relationships, which might cause pain then. Like it just, everything goes south, right? So we really just need to understand why God gave us sex, and that sex has a very specific purpose. And it's not the way society and sometimes people in the church look at it is sex is a really great and fun thing to do. And it just happens to work best in marriage. Right. And that's not it. Like, no, sex is created for marriage to bring us together. It's not just a fun hobby that happens to work best in marriage. Right. And that's why God's not this mean, like evil, vindictive, hey, I created this really great thing. but I'm not going to let you do it until you get married. Like, that's so mean. Like, why would you do that to me, God? You know how great this is.
I mean, look, he was doing it before the fall. That was happening before the fall. So it's like he planned this. This is supposed to be part of his design. Yeah.
But he's like, no, yeah, you're right. I'm not trying to withhold it from you. I'm trying to make sure that you get the best out of it. Right. And the way you get the best out of it is in the situation that I have set up. That's how you get the best out of it. So it's not about me trying to hold back the best. It's about me trying to give you the best. But if you decide to go on your own and do your own thing, you're not going to experience the best. Right. And that's not me being mean. That's you being stupid. Right.
There you go.
I love that you went there, because I think that there's nothing wrong. Like, some people would be like, oh my gosh, but it is a sin. So why can't you say that? And that's not the point. In the same way that the New Testament reveals that just reading the letter of the law is not enough to change hearts. And he's showing over and over. I said, don't commit adultery. And you took that very literally, because it's written down. And you punished people for physically having sex. But I'm going to tell you that just looking at her with lustful eyes is the exact same thing. So he shows us over and over. It's not just, hey, can I do this after 3 months? Or, hey, pornography's bad, so I'm just going to go read really steamy romance novels and, read fan fiction that takes it a little bit farther. You know what I mean? And that's one of the things you experience in the female sphere a lot. They don't even know they have a porn problem because we wouldn't call it porn. You call it romance novels. But romance novels, it sounds so nice and sweet and innocent, but you're literally reading a description, like the closed captioning for the porn your husband's watching. And it's one of those things where it's not about you should feel as much shame as your husband, but instead, I like what you said, like, instead of just saying it's sin and closing the book on it and making people come up with their own conclusion. Why is God so arbitrary in what's good and why are the fun things the things that are bad? Like, this God must want us to suffer. I love that you went there, because the thing is, when you lovingly sit someone down without fear of being rejected or embarrassed, that's loving the way God called us to love anyway. You go in and you keep it real and you let them know, you humble yourself and tell your kids how it has affected you, how watching that has made it hard for me to connect to my husband, how him watching that has made it hard, like made him like more angry or more possessive or whatever happens, right?
Yeah.
If you tell your kids that, now they are armed with real truth of what it actually is in the long term, like you said, like the long term mentality of it. Because that was going to be my next question, and then you went there already. Is how do you tell your kids about it? Because people are always shocked that I found out what sex was and what everything was called when I was 3, and it helped me actually be protected from the first potential, like, unwarranted contact I was going to have with a kid who was exposed to older kids. And he was telling me things, but I knew the words he was using. I was like, no, I'm good. I don't want none of that. But I wouldn't have known. Mm-hmm. And that was at 3 in the early 90s. I can only imagine now. So do you have anything else for like the really young kids? Because you mentioned your son, you told him before his teens, but like what other advice do you have for parents who are like, maybe they've overcome it, or maybe they've never touched it. They've seen it, but it's never gripped them. But they still have kids that wear smartphones, and even Netflix is softcore or full on. Like what would you say for the sake of the kids?
Yeah, I mean, I would say start as early as you can having these talks. Obviously, use some wisdom there. If your kid doesn't have a smartphone, and you don't have, he doesn't, like, if you have a 4-year-old. Right. I didn't have a talk with my son at 4 because he went to school. He came home. I didn't have to worry about him catching something on TV because we log in. Right. I didn't have to worry about him seeing something on the computer because it was our computer. Right. And he didn't go on a computer without us. I didn't have to worry about it because he didn't have a smartphone.
Right.
So it wasn't an issue. But my first talk with him was at 6, and we went to Ant-Man. I remember to this day, we went to Ant-Man, the first one, and it was great. And after Ant-Man, we hit TGI Fridays. I don't know if that's a restaurant out there, but TGI Fridays is a restaurant chain right here. So we go to Fridays. It was in the same parking lot, and we're eating. And I said, so let me talk to you a little bit about sex. And he was like, what? And then explain to him. The minute I said penis and vagina, he just bawled. He just thought it was so funny. There's a family to the left of us with their kids, and I think they're thinking to themselves, the heck? Like, of all the nights to come to Fridays, we sit next to dad, son, penis, vagina talk. Are you kidding me? But whatever, you know?
Right.
Luck of the draw, my friends. But yeah, we just started having that talk, and, you know, it's the constant, like, bringing it up, talking about it. Also, my wife and I talk about things, not sex per se, but we don't pretend that we're prudes. And sometimes we kid with the kids, like they're getting older. So we like grossing them out, you know? And
I'm looking at you. Like, I'm just waiting.
And it's like, we do this stuff though, to kind of normalize the idea that, hey, these are okay to these things are okay to talk about. And we can have a conversation about sex at the dinner table. It doesn't need to be a certain time of night or a certain time of day. And, you know, as he gets older, we get into deeper and deeper conversations, but it always ends up with, hey, listen, man, if this happens, or if you see this, or if that happens, just come and talk to me. You're not going to be in trouble. Right. This stuff happens, and parents don't want to hear it, but it's not if, it's when. They're going to see it. Guaranteed, almost, unless you live in the mountains with no power. Like, they're going to see it. So you need to have that conversation, and the earlier you can have that conversation, the earlier you can establish trust, the earlier you can let them feel confident that you are a source of comfort and advice and someone that cares for their well-being. And then when these things come up, it's not going to be, oh, I can't tell mom and dad. It's going to be, who else would I tell? I'm going to tell mom and dad. I tell mom and dad about everything. And they always, you know, they're always going to give me a hug. And if it is something that's not good, or if it is something that's not appropriate that I shouldn't be looking at, they're also going to tell me that. You know, but not heavy-handed. You know, they're just going to say, yeah, listen, that's not a good thing. We had, I talk about this in the book too, but it was just a funny conversation. We approach the same thing, not just with sex, but like with all sorts of things. So language is a big thing. We started having talks with our kids at a very early age about curse words and language, and we don't use bad words and dirty, like we don't use those terms. We say, hey, it's not appropriate. Okay. You don't use the F word, because it's just not, especially at your age, but even at my age, it's not appropriate. And there's a reason, because, you know, it hurts people's feelings, and it's not what Jesus would do. But we have these conversations. I remember when my son was in kindergarten or first grade, I can't remember. My wife calls me up and says, hey, Carl, can you talk to Hunter today? And I said, sure. Why? She said, his teacher said that he called a kid in school a dick. And I was kind of shocked. I said, really? I said, okay. So gets home, I'm like, yo, buddy, you want to go for a ride? He goes, yeah. So he gets in the car, we start driving. I said, hey, mommy called me and told me that your teacher said you said the word dick in school. He said, yeah, Moby Dick. Oh, okay. And he said, why? I said, well, just so you know, dick is also like a not nice way of referring to a man's penis. And of course he starts bawling, right? And I thought at that point we were done the conversation, but then he says, are there other words for other body parts? And I said, yes, there are. Like what? Dude, we went through them all. I mean, all. There were a couple where I said to him, listen, if you ever say this around your mom, she might literally kill you. Like, or any woman. You never say, I'll kill you if you say this word. This is not a word you ever say, but you're going to hear it. And, you know, it was, then I told my wife how I handled it, and she was like, did you have to tell him those words? I said,
I mean, look,
he's going to hear it someday.
What do you want? It's better he knows. Like,
yeah. What do you want me to do? At least now when he hears it, he knows he shouldn't repeat it, because it's not a nice word. So, but that's just kind of how we handle parenting with all sorts of things, not just sex. You know, the earlier you can get at them and give them the right information and let them know the why behind the what, you know, it's not just don't do it. It's why you don't do it. The better off they're going to be, because they're going to be prepared for those situations when they come up.
I think that a point out of that I took that was really cool was how you and your wife aren't hiding in the closet with your relationship. I like keeping it real. I like keeping authentic. I like our kids doing this. I like what you're doing. Man, look, y'all, check out his book.
We don't try to weird them out, but
right.
You know, it's fun. We were watching a Marvel show, Luke Cage, before they took it off Netflix.
Yeah.
My daughter and I were watching it, and in the show he refers to sex as coffee a few times, right? Like it was kind of like a running joke throughout the show.
Yeah.
And so my son wasn't watching the show, so he was clueless. But I come into the family room, and my daughter and my son are there. We're eating dinner, and my wife's sitting there. I said, "Hey, later on, do you think you'd be up for some coffee?" And I looked at me, and she's like, Dad.
So we're so here, brother. Trust me, we're so here. Because like, not that I want to make it weird, but it's like I think that it's good for them to see healthy. But man, look,
exactly.
Thank you for coming on. I think that people are gonna really glean out of this and get something out of this. And I always give you an opportunity to say something. Is there something that maybe we didn't cover, or something that you would like to just add in? But you've covered a lot of base. So
yeah.
I mean, I would just say this, and this is the whole reason pretty much the majority of my thought process in terms of when I started writing this book was that, you know, especially in the Christian world, the common idea is, hey, if we're going to see healthy sexuality and we're going to see people get free of porn and this and that, we need more resources, more awareness, more condemning. We need to, call out the porn industry for the evil people they are, and blah, blah, blah. And I got news for you. AAA's Church has been around for 20 years before we acquired it as part of our ministry. But they were the first, right, to really get loud about it. And back then there weren't resources. I mean, there were few and far between, and the resources that were out there were antiquated and awful. And 20 years later, there's tons of organizations doing this thing, tons of resources. There's all sorts of people lobbying for this, and porn is evil and porn is bad. And I'm not saying it's good, but at the end of the day, pornography consumption rates aren't getting any better. You're not seeing healthier sexuality in the church at all. So if more awareness, more condemning, more resources aren't doing the trick, then we got to be missing something, right? You can't keep insanity doing the same thing and expecting the same results. Like you're missing something. It should get better. And I'm a firm believer that the reason it's not getting better is we're still not willing to talk about these things just as a part of life. Right. This is a part of life. And it's a part of life that some people get right. And it's a part of life that some people don't get so right. And that's just the way it is. And rather than whispering about it or feeling bad about it, let's just all own it and work together to help each other out. And I think if we can start talking about these things more freely and not feeling the shame about certain conversations or certain, struggles, I think you're going to see a whole lot more healing happen. But until we can do that, and we keep treating it as like this closet issue, I don't think things are going to change, to be honest. I think it's just going to keep going and going and going. And then what happens is we as parents, that's why our parenting, my wife and I parent a very certain way, because I believe that what happens is people that struggle with this grow up feeling shameful about these topics, and so they don't talk to their kids. And then their kids grow up feeling shameful about their talk, so they don't talk to their kids. And so we just keep perpetuating the monster. And at some point we have to say, hey, this has to change. And then when we change, when we start talking to kids about this stuff, when we start making this not a hands-off situation, no pun intended, we're going to start seeing a difference. Right.
Shining light in the darkness.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's so sense, not in like that religious sense, but like in that sense of, hey, when we bring it out, now light can shine on it, and I just like that.
I see that parallel when you were talking about your children. You said, you won't be in trouble, just come to me. And is that not why Jesus died? Right. So that we can come to the Father and not get in trouble. Like, yes, worldly consequences, absolutely. But when you are his child, you can come to him with anything, and he's not the one that's going to dole out the punishment. The world will gladly do so, but he won't. Yep. And so that's one of the things, if nothing to take away, like this, the change of the conversation, So thank you again for being here.
Absolutely.
This has been an awesome episode as usual. But please let everyone know where they can find you and the different communities and resources that you have put together.
So the book is the easiest place to find information on a book is whenshamegetsreal.com. You can obviously buy the book there, but you can also download the first chapter for free if you want to get a flavor for what it is. And it's not just, a lot of people assume because I'm an ex-porn addict or whatever you want to call it, and the XXXChurch guy and blah, blah, blah. A lot of people assume it's just for guys struggling with porn. It's not. It's for parents, it's for pastors, it's for whoever. It's, again, we all need to open up the conversations on this thing.
Right.
So that's whenshamegetsreal.com. I mean, we have a ton of different things, but I would say probably the easiest place to go would be XXXchurch.com. And then you can find links to all our different platforms and resources, including the Live Free Community app, including Live Free Wives if you're a spouse, including small groups online if the idea of a weekly online small group, video-based sounds good to you, including X3 Pure, which is our video workshop, like all that stuff. You can just find it on XXXchurch.com right on the homepage. That's probably the easiest place to go so they don't have like 80 links to chase down, right?
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. And for everybody that's listening, if you want us to join in prayer, if you have any questions about this, feel free to go to thepantrypodcast.com where you can reach out for answers to those questions, or at least we'll connect you with the right person. And you can always get all of these links in the show notes. So until next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.